and welcome everyone to the IGP Soundbite series. I'm Professor Henrietta Moore. I'm the director and founder of the Institute for Global Prosperity. And it's our great pleasure today to welcome Archie Ruggles-Brise, who owns and manages the Spain's Hall estate in Essex. Archie has experience gained in the UK environmental charity sector, as well as all of his farming expertise. And his farm is home to the first Eurasian beavers to return to East Anglia for over 500 years. They've been brought back to deliver ecosystem services and flood risk reduction. He's also a trustee of the Essex and Suffolk Rivers Trust and a committee member of the Country Land and Business Association. And he received the Essex Wildlife Trust's Living Rivers Landscape Conservation Award in 2019. We're particularly lucky to have Archie here today because he has been working with Professor Jacqueline McLeod at the IGP and other colleagues and communities across Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk, including not only landowners and farmers, but councils, community groups and so forth. He's been part of the Essex Climate Commission's Land Use and Green Infrastructure Special Interest Group, and their report will be released later this year, probably in June and July, and we're all looking forward to that. So Archie, thank you for coming to the IGP. Welcome. And could I offer you the floor?
Thank you very much indeed. It's a real pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share some of what we're doing on a sort of really small scale compared to your sort of global outlook. So I hope we can marry the two during the session. I will just try and share my screen now so that you can see. Got a few slides, so hopefully you can see that now, can you?
Wonderful beaver, yeah, great.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, thank you very much. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're, I would say, starting to use nature-based solutions to really transform our business into a more sustainable model, and one that we hope will become much more accessible, not only in the UK, but further afield. Oh, hang on, there we go. So a little bit about the estate itself. So we sit in North Essex. So you can see on the map there, we're northeast of London. We're almost in Cambridgeshire. We're quite far north in Essex. The estate itself covers around 800 hectares, so 2,000 acres, and we're 75% cropland, arable land. So we grow things like wheat and barley and sugar beet, alongside a 25% coverage of woodland and grassland and hedges. So we've got a fairly standard landscape mix for East Anglia, which is one of the main crop producing areas in England, certainly. We've also got diversification, so it's not just farming that we do the woodland management. So we've got about 80 hectares of ancient semi-natural woodland, so all broadleaf native woodlands. And through those we cull venison, so we produce wild venison products from that management system, but we also do things like let holiday cottages and have residents on the estate and various other things. So a fairly typical mix of kind of activities for an estate like ours. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that the estate, we have been here a long time. So my family bought the estate in 1760. Our ancestors made money in the wool trade, which is very common in East Anglia, and decided they wanted a country pad, found Spain's Hall estate out just 20 miles away from where they were already working, and bought it for £14,700 back in 1760. And you can see this map behind us. This is a map that was drawn on vellum by Pope of the estate in 1618, so before my family took it on. But you can see that the landscape in there is still very arable, or it's very crop heavy. There's a bit more woodland, and we'll come back to that later. But interestingly, the boundaries of the estate and the boundaries of the fields haven't really changed that much since that 1618 map was drawn. And it reflects a predominantly food-first approach to land use in this part of East Anglia, and I would say most of the UK. There is definitely a food-first bias. And for us now, currently on the estate, we deliver the food element through letting land out to professional farmers. However, we're now in a period where we're looking again at all of our operations, and we look at all the diversified operations, but also the farming ones. and wondering whether this is the most sustainable model on all counts. So from a socially sustainable model, but also the environment and financially for us. And then we have some local problems that we are trying to address. So these 4 pictures are all of the same place. So they're Finchingfield, the little village that we neighbour. This is downstream from us, but you can see that flooding is a consistent problem. The top right picture is the most extreme flood, the 2001 flood, which you can see those of you that you've got eagle eyes, you can see there's a pickup truck that's almost submerged in that area. So you can see that's the deepest, most damaging flood that we've had in living memory, but it happens quite a lot on a much lower level. So this is something that my background is in water charities, as Henrietta mentioned. So I've worked with the Rivers Trust movement for many years. So I'm very comfortable with sort of catchment scale and understanding where water comes from. So my first sort of job when I came back to help run the family business in 2008 was to try and work out, where is this water coming from and is there anything we can do about it? And I then started teaming up with the professionals. So looking at this on a hydrological basis, looking at it on a sort of catchment scale or a sub-catchment scale in our case, it very quickly became apparent that our location would lend itself quite nicely to nature-based solutions. So the red area on the map on the left is the Blackwater, the River Blackwater catchment. Finchingfield is the little village that we neighbour. So you can see that's right at the top end of the catchment. So the water's flowing sort of top left to bottom right down to the sea. And the map in the middle, you can see the lighter coloured area, that's the estate. So those are our fields, that's our land ownership boundary. And if you can make out, there is a thin red line that goes across it, that is the sub-catchment that feeds into Finchingfield. So you can see whilst we don't cover all of it, we cover around about 50%. And we therefore have an ideal position to influence those flows coming through. It is worth saying that those properties that you saw in Finchingfield below us, they're not linked to the estate. We don't own them. We don't manage them. We don't have any businesses in the village. So what we're trying to do is really for the benefit of those residents, because there are no other ways of tackling this sort of problem on a cost-benefit basis. So what did we do? So I pulled together my expertise and a lot of contacts that I've made in the Environment Agency and the Rivers Trust movement and much wider to design and deliver a natural flood management project. So this is using nature-based solutions, so cheaper, natural systems to try and tackle the flood risk. But we didn't really just stop with the sort of standard stuff. We decided that this would be an ideal opportunity to bring beavers back into the mix, but do it in a structured way that allowed us to examine the impacts alongside the more standard traditional man-made stuff. And also from my perspective, I'm a fundamentally lazy person, and the idea of getting something in that would do a better job for a longer time and run the maintenance that I didn't have to feed, pay, or tell what to do was just amazingly attractive to me. So I thought, well, let's give it a go. And we're trying to do a number of things with this. So we're not just trying to reduce flood risk locally and improve habitat and improve rivers. We're trying to do all of that, but we're also trying to shine a light on some of these approaches, including using beavers, to see whether other people can pick up some of these ideas or whether we can attract further interest to help us develop and improve this stuff. And for us on the estate, we have developed a sustainable tourism offer on the back of the beavers, but we're also contributing much more widely to an evidence base for paid ecosystem service contracts, looking at flood risk, particularly in this sense, but also some water quality impacts as well. And with the policy shifts that are happening in the UK at the moment, it's an ideal opportunity to be providing real life, tested, live examples of what might be possible if policy changed. So we're kind of operating a little bit ahead of some of the political or some of the sort of policy pronouncements, and certainly the detail of things like the UK's new agricultural support scheme, the Environmental Land Management Scheme. But we're hoping that this information will at least feed into that. So what did we do? We built 8 leaky dams. So these are structures that are designed to sort of hold and spill water out onto the catchment that you can see in the top right-hand picture there. That was a few weeks ago. And we released beavers. So this is the thing that really attracts people, and that in itself is quite an interesting concept. But you can see on the left-hand side there, the picture, that straight line that's running down from the top to the bottom of the picture, which is where the water runs, that was a ditch through a woodland. And 2 years on, you can see that the beavers have created a massive network of wetlands and dams. And the middle dam in the picture, the sort of darker line there, is the middle dam in the series of 3 pictures. So you can see they've built massive structures. And we involve other people. So I said that, you know, this is a landowner-led project, but we want to try and gather information in a rigorous way, or as rigorous a way as we can. So we've reached out to anybody who wishes to help us with that. So we've got a lot of open source data flows coming out at the moment, a lot of sampling data. And this is something we want to continue to do. And we did manage to get some information before we started the project as well, which is great. And we did a biohack, so a volunteer-based survey day, which this was before we did anything. We were hoping to do another one last year, but for obvious reasons, we couldn't do that. So we'll come back to this again in the future. And I mentioned there is a sort of commercial aspect to this on the estate. So we do photography and filming sessions, and we've got a partnership with a really top-level wildlife filmmaker called Russell Savory, and he leads guided tours to the beaver enclosure to help people get up close and personal. And then on a more general basis, I showed in 2019, I personally showed over 500 people around the estate and around the Beaver project, including everyone from just general public, but drainage engineers, and you can see children from our local Beaver Scouts group there as well. So, you know, we try and reach out to anybody. And what this has led us to do really is to take all these sort of different concepts that we've been putting together and say, right, well, what is the appropriate way to actually manage the land use going forward on a super long-term basis? And I quite like the concept of natural capital, but particularly natural capital that envelops all the other capitals and is supportive of that. So it's quite interesting to read the bits of the Dasgupta review I've managed to get through so far seem to be very supportive of this kind of approach, which is really heartening, because it kind of feels like we're not on the wrong track. Just to give you an illustration of what we currently use our land for, so this is a very typical picture. We've got food production, we've got timber, but there's only a limited number of things that we can actually derive a revenue from. And this is common with a lot of land-based businesses, that we're asset rich, so we're lucky enough to own a lot of the land and we've got a lot of assets behind us, but in terms of revenue, in terms of cash flow, there's a very limited number of things that you can actually generate income on. But this is what I want to do. So this is where I want to take it and do all of these things, but also capture some of them in a way that we can monetize them. We don't need to monetize all of them. And some of the things that we do, we shouldn't be monetizing. They are public goods and we should just be doing them because it's something that we ought to do. But equally, if you can start to articulate this, then it really helps. So to do that, we moved to our first ever natural capital appraisal in late 2019. And we worked with a firm, Atkins, the big engineering firm, but I know some people there as part of the Beaver project who are catchment managers and ecologists. So we all got together and we pulled together a natural capital impact. But what we were able to do, because I have plans to do quite a lot on the estate of change, we modeled the baseline, but we actually backcast the baseline to before I'd done anything. So our baseline is 2017. We did this appraisal in 2019, but we actually used 2017 data to do it. And then we took the next part of the appraisal through the current beaver and flood project and through the conceptual framework that I've got for the next set of projects, and actually said, well, once we've done all of that, what would be the change? And what this has allowed us to do is not only reveal some of the quantities in terms of, the tons of soil we're losing from our arable operation, the tons of nutrients that are being exported from our system. We've been able to model how that could change based on some of these project ideas. So what we can now say, actually, there's we stand to save 9 tons of soil per year by changing a certain amount of the system, which in turn then becomes, that's us safeguarding our asset, that's us looking after our own risk and mitigating our own risk, which will be a familiar concept to any of you that work in supply chain analysis. But also, you know, we can sequester around about 300 tons of carbon a year if we do a bit more woodland planting, if we work things slightly differently in terms of migrating some of our arable land to grassland and things like that. But then also things like if we open up areas of the estate and we develop projects and we build systems to encourage people on, we could perhaps get around about 150 educational visits a year and 2,500 health visits a year. So these are people that are able to use the estate to support their health and well-being. And there's loads of different things that have come out of this. And I think the main one for us is that it's allowed us to kind of pick those things that the land area that we have control of is capable of delivering. So one of the things that I do a bit of natural work on natural capital for other people, and one of the things I always try and make clear to them is that your land's ability to deliver different ecosystem services varies absolutely in time and in space. So you are going to be able to do different things to what your neighbour is. And the value of those things, if you're willing to monetize them or if you wish to put a capital value on them, is going to be different. And that will also change over time. So if you start to make changes now, then your land's ability to support those changes going forward means that that quantity of ecosystem service provision, so the benefits back to humans from that, is going to change. So, and this is something that's sometimes a bit difficult for farmers to get their heads around, because a ton of wheat is a ton of wheat. It doesn't really matter on a commodity market where that ton of wheat comes from. But my 1,000 litres of clean water is going to be worth more, or is going to be more intrinsically valuable here than it is there. And that's something that's one of the problems with this kind of approach is communicating that variability. The final thing that we've got sort of stuck into now is, because we could articulate this change and the benefit change, or the potential benefit change of some of the project ideas we've got on the estate, is that we bid into Natural England's Biodiversity Net Gain Credits pilot. So this is a piece of work that is helping to try and work out how the most remote form of biodiversity net gain offsetting, if you like, for development in the UK will work once it's enacted. We expect the law to be enacted in about 2023, or to finish the transition period. And any development that happens after that time will have to not only replace the habitat or the species that it affects, that it destroys, but they'll have to do it plus 10%. And what we're doing is we were very lucky to be selected as one of 9 national pilot sites, looking at, right, okay, what does it mean? How much does it cost to change land use? What do the management agreements look like? You know, how do you use the metric that DEFRA have put together to quantify biodiversity change over time? So we're still in the middle of this. We haven't got the answers to this at all at the moment, but it's really exciting to be part of this and to use some of the concepts that we're developing to feed directly into a policy development in the UK, which is really exciting. And these are the projects. So there's 3 main areas. So we've got a 40-hectare beaver enclosure that I want to create, which is 10 times the size of the current one, the one you saw the picture of earlier. But that involves a bit of woodland planting. It involves removing arable operations from an area of the farm, perhaps even going so far as just letting it be self-willed in terms of rewilding, and then a bit of woodland recreation to fill in some of the gaps that we've noticed in our ancient woodlands, with reference to that 1618 map. That's my starting point. I say, well, we've got this historic information. Why have we changed that field use into arable? It looks much more like it should be woodland. It should be more contiguous. And the final thing that I'm looking at is developing agroforestry on the estate. So we already work with trees and pasture and grazing. That's been something we've done for many years. But what we want to try and get into is alley cropping. So this is mixing lines of productive trees, so fruit or nut trees or berries, in with our arable cropping operation. And this is basically just to try and introduce more diversity into the system so that we don't have large areas of monoculture in quite the same way, but also trying to produce food. And what I would say is that my entire concept around the estate is, rather than being a food first operation and everything else kind of has to hang out the back of that or has to be done despite of it, What I want to do is flip it over and say, well, we're going to be an ecosystem services first. We're going to be a public benefit, environmentally conscious operation, and we will produce food in a way that fits with that. So it will be almost a kind of hunter-gatherer type starting point and saying, well, we will have a sustainable harvest of whatever it is we can produce. But because we've got a diverse system, we won't be producing the volumes that we are now, but nutritionally, we hope they're going to be better. And actually, some of the studies suggest for things like agroforestry, you actually get a higher per unit area yield over time. So one of the systems in the UK that's already up and running is getting about 1.25 land equivalent ratio. So they're growing crops and growing apples as well. So it's quite an interesting concept. So that was the biodiversity net gain project. And my final couple of slides are where I want to go. So the biodiversity net gain, what I did was take out some of the interesting bits from my overall concept and say, these are the things that I think you could test your biodiversity metric on. But actually what I want to do on about 1,000 acres of the estate is try and roll out that agroforestry, more diverse arable and agricultural and food production system, but also bring in the rewilding and the beavers and more woodland creation. So generally speaking, we should be looking, you come back to me in about, 5-10 years time, we should be well down the road of this, saying, actually, here is a different land use model, completely different land use model at a scale that is impossible to ignore in the UK. Still very small scale in terms of public policy, because we're one farm in the middle of East Anglia, but hopefully it will allow people to sort of test ideas and come and sort of smell the ground. It's one of the things you need to get out there and look at it. So we want to be a site that people can come and experience what scale agroforestry is like in the UK. And the final tenet of all of this is we've got a partnership just growing and developing with an environmental and social charity who use the outdoors to deliver services, both healthcare and educational services. So we want to use the opportunity that we have as a landholder to invite them onto the estate, build a partnership with them where we can not only deliver therapy, but we can also deliver education at all levels, right? So right from tiny tots up to, people in my position who are, struggling with land use change and understanding, how do you practically manage some of these systems. Give them an opportunity to come and get their hands stuck in, but also then develop social enterprises and a hyper-local food chain. So a lot of the products we're going to be producing out of this system would lend themselves to being processed on site and sold very locally. And this can be part of a social enterprise model so that the service users of that charity have the opportunity to develop products and product lines and micro-commercial businesses to generate some income for themselves. So, we're trying to do quite a lot over the next few years, but it could be quite interesting. And it's really a whole farm approach to everything in terms of, the social aspect of what we are, the social fabric, the environmental fabric, the water that flows across us, but really try and do it in an integrated way, which is, I think, unusual, but I'd be interested in your views and very interested in your questions. So thank you very much indeed.
Wow, well, thank you very much. That was amazing and very, very inspiring. So you must be very pleased with your beavers. I mean, you don't have to feed them, you don't have to pay them, and they're doing a good job, aren't they?
Yeah, they're staggeringly productive. They put all of us to shame, I'm afraid.
So one of the interesting things, I think, for lots of people listening, Archie, is that, the farming of the future then isn't just going to be farming as we've understood it. This is going to be about therapy, about education, about carbon sequestration, about, local level food production. So that's really quite a revolution for a farmer, isn't it? I mean, what's it been like going on that journey in the context of policy in the UK? I mean, it must have been a bit of a bumpy ride, hasn't it?
Well, I mean, I say we're not there yet. We're still dealing with the concept, and at the moment I'm trying to pull in enough support to make it viable. And I say that is the biggest barrier that any one individual or any one business is going to face, will be the transition. Because once you're settled into a new system, you then understand the revenue flows, you understand what the liabilities and the opportunities are. We're at that stage where I think I've got a reasonably good handle, but the transition is still to be done. So, you know, I can see the benefits. And I think if you hang it into, if you're able to articulate the non-monetary benefits in a way that that gains traction with policymakers or gains traction with local authorities or whoever it is you're trying to influence, then it actually, the pure commercial side of things almost becomes easier to resolve.
Yeah.
But it's very difficult to articulate those things.
Yeah, it's very, very hard because, I mean, the work we're doing in Africa, for example, where we're dealing with soils, we may only have 10 harvests left on those soils. And yet getting people to make the change is very difficult because the immediate cost of making that change is very great. And there's not sufficient sort of government support for it. So when you're looking at the new scheme that's coming in post-Brexit, so the Environment Land Management Scheme, as it's called, if we ever get the Environment Bill through the Houses of Parliament and all the rest of it, you know, how does that look to you? Does that look like genuinely progressive legislation, or you still have some concerns there?
I think when it was first mooted, I was delighted because it looked like an outcomes-based ecosystem service principled policy tool. I think necessarily through the kind of evolution of it, it's become much less ambitious. However, having said that, there isn't really enough detail in the different kind of grouping. So they've got a sort of local grouping and then a sort of local regional grouping and then a national grouping type approach. There is still plenty of potential for those things to be properly ambitious and to provide the kind of first loss transition underwriting that you've articulated is the same it doesn't matter what system, each system has a different hurdle. Yeah. So for us, the costs and the risks are here, and for your African farmers, they'll be somewhere else. I think if the policy can help do that, and at the same time embed monitoring and evaluation that gives confidence in the outcomes that these policy changes and the practical changes that result from the policy make, then the justification for that policy change is going to be much stronger. If we go 10 years down the line and we're not able to answer whether the policy has affected land use change and that land use change is delivering the goods that it's targeting, then that's going to be a massive failure. Yeah, it's very difficult. Now that raises interesting questions about, you were saying, or you repeated a couple of times, that you're at the small scale, although of course you're quite a big farm, but what's happening across the country, or from your perspective, in terms of sort of knowledge sharing between farmers and estate managers and you know, the whole sort of ecosystem that must be sustaining this kind of movement? I mean, is that knowledge sharing working well, and could we do more to support it? I think ironically, I think during the pandemic, the accessibility to information has never been greater. So if you can connect and you can find the time, there is almost no subject area that you can't dip into, because of sessions like this are much more accessible to people than relying on getting them in the room. In terms of information sharing between farmers and between groups, I think it's still very sectoral. So what happens is that people tend to latch onto a system. So they either, they're either min-till or, no tillage, or they're conventional farmers. And I think very quickly what happens is that people get sucked into a particular sort of self-repeating mindset and are quite reluctant to reach out of that sometimes. And I think that's this is where the social media doesn't really help, I don't think, because it's very polarizing. Yeah. I think government, to be fair, some of the leaders of the future farming team at DEFRA are trying very, very hard to reach across these different subject areas. But in terms of kind of self-willed information finding and sharing, there's a number of groups that have set up. So there's one called Land Management 2.0, which is run as a completely independent thing. It's essentially a discussion and webinar group. There's the Nature Friendly Farming Network in the UK. So there's a number springing up, but it's quite fragmented still. I think the one thing that you could do to help as a group of researchers and as experts in your field is try and bring in some more examples of what's happened elsewhere. In the world, we're very parochial in the UK. We tend to discard good practice from elsewhere by very quickly settling on the differences rather than the potential opportunities and similarities. So I think, a bit more of that would always help.
That's great. I'm going to bring in Jackie, and she's on the panel so she can ask her question herself, because it's, I think, following up on this point. Jackie.
Yeah, thanks, Archie. It was really inspirational, and I think you've made a huge, certainly it's going to open up lots of discussions. So we know that there are farmers sort of beginning to get together, putting contiguous areas together, but one of the elements that's usually missing is this rewilding. And I heard a criticism very much about rewilding being something for, the other parts of Britain. And that if you're sitting in the city, you say, oh yes, everyone should be doing rewilding. But when you're living in the rural area, of course, it's a different concept altogether. And this idea of farmers, hands up in the air, oh my goodness, no beavers. So I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that, and whether we could bring rewilding closer to the city so people can have a much greater understanding of the choices that farmers and landowners have to make, and the upsides and the downsides of rewilding, whether beavers are the bridge or the dam. They build the dam between the wolves and that side of the rewilding. So I wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that.
I think you're right in that the messaging coming out of urban areas, when it's applied to real life land use change, doesn't always fit, or it doesn't feel like it fits. I think the main issue, there's probably two main issues that you have to deal with when you're dealing with trying to change, and you've got to remember that these are people's businesses. So the great luxury that you have if you don't have a land holding, which is your livelihood, is that you can say whatever you like about land use and it doesn't personally affect you. Yeah. So you've got to recognize that this is how somebody is feeding their family. So therefore there is an intrinsic reluctance to change until you can instill confidence or help them mitigate the risk of doing something different. I think if you can do that, if anyone can do that and say, well, these are the things that we think are going to be useful. This is the context we're putting your land in. And I always come back to a river catchment because it's a nice natural, a watershed in concept is something that we understand from quite a young age in terms of where water flows. And, you can put yourself in context. And I think if there is value attached to that context, both from the recipient's perspective, but also from the person who's asking for the change, they've got to appreciate the value of the things that you're asking them to provide that don't currently have a value. Then actually you start to sort of tweak a few levers. And if you could say to somebody, and a lot of people are doing this already, and a lot of people are finding the mechanisms to make that change. If you can say, well, the clean water you're producing is actually worth this, and we will give you a contract to produce that clean water, as long as you do these things that don't involve, perhaps they don't involve any inputs at all on your farmed area.
Right.
You can then, people will then look at it in a very different way, because land valuation in the UK is based almost exclusively on revenue flows. And once subsidies drop off and things, I think we can probably expect that to be more and more rigorous. If you've got a revenue flow over a parcel of land, then all you do to find the value of that land is capitalize that revenue back and say, okay, I forecasted it was going to produce this over the next 25 years. Here's an NPV value for now, and that's what we'll sell it for, or sell the contract to produce those goods for. And I think once you get to that point, the initial decision you're asking people to make isn't between, I can earn money doing this and I'm going to do this, which is brilliant, but it's going to cost me money. Then that's the first hurdle you've got to get over. The other one, I think, is that perception thing. Rewilding, I think, has a perception of, people aren't part of the ecosystem. So it's exclusive, it's exclusive. So we set this aside for wildlife, and actually people are then, not part of that picture. Right from the early days of my first degree, doing an applied biology degree, it's very obvious that people are part of the ecosystem and they need to be part of the ecosystem. And in the UK, we live in an entirely managed landscape. You can't exclude people from that landscape. So you need to find ways that people can coexist alongside whatever it is you're interested in. It might be pine martens, it might be beavers, it might be natural flood management, it might be accessible open space. It doesn't matter what it is. People have got to be part of that. And the people that own and manage the land, because we have a private ownership model in the UK, you've got to make sure that those people are the first people that you talk to. Because if you don't, then it's just going to come apart.
Yeah, now this has got a lot of people very excited. So we have a lot of questions coming down the line. So the first one, Archie, is from Yvonne Ryden, and she's asking if you've ever considered micro hydro to yield electricity off the land.
Well, considering that the head drop across our estate is, I think our highest point is 80 metres and our lowest point is 70. We haven't got a lot of capacity for micro hydro. And also, notwithstanding the fact we're in a very dry area, so, and until my beavers have produced pools that allow the rivers to run 12 months of the year, a hydro scheme wouldn't be viable. But other microgeneration definitely is. We've got, we're trying to put solar panels on some of our buildings. We've interestingly run into heritage problems. So there's all sorts of conflicting regulation that means that it's not quite as easy as you would hope. But we have we've got air source heat pumps and things like that, and all of our electricity generation is sourced from green providers, so 100% proper green providers. But yeah, I think microgeneration is definitely something we all need to think about. But then so is storage, and so is how the grid can deal with variable demand and variable production, which it can't at the moment.
Yeah, no, but distributed energy is nevertheless a very important and transformative thing, isn't it? So now we've got someone who's anonymous who's asking, do you have any intention of leveraging Jamie Oliver's platform to raise awareness and help with policy change? And how has his ownership altered the estate management? Is he part of the story, Jamie, you think?
So yeah, I mean, we sold our family home to the Olivers a couple of years ago. That was after a fairly difficult period where I came in and looked at what we were doing on the estate and decided that actually we couldn't continue to support a very large house as part of the middle of it. So we decided to sell. We enjoy being neighbours with them. They're great. They're lovely people, lovely family. If he wishes to get involved, the opportunity is there. But I guess it comes down to would you ask your neighbour to put their reputation on the line for something that they probably have no idea about? The opportunity may be there, but it's certainly not something we're doing at the moment.
No discussion of other kinds of cooking things. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So Johnny Stormont-Darling is asking, I know several farmers who get very angry at the mere mention of beavers, and do you have to fence them in? And is that a problem with your neighbours and so on?
So it's not a problem with our neighbours because the beaver impact zone, if you like, is entirely on my land, and I very specifically put it there so that I didn't have to deal with those sort of conflicts. There was enough to get past, doing it for the first time in the area. I didn't want the neighbour conflict to be the thing that held it up. We did fence them. All reintroductions are not really reintroductions at the moment for beavers. They are licensed releases into a fenced enclosure. So we have created a 4-hectare fenced enclosure for that. I think some of the concerns that farmers have, or anyone that has around beavers, are very valid. And they will build structures in inappropriate places. They will eat things you don't want them to eat, be that trees or crops or whatever. So what we're very keen to do and what we're engaged in doing is trying to support efforts to develop a beaver management plan in advance of any further unfenced releases, so that there is a mitigation hierarchy that kicks in if you've got a problem. So if, for example, a beaver turns up in the middle of Finchingfield and builds a dam on the outlet to the pond, which then runs the risk of flooding a load of people's houses, there is a mechanism both to perhaps translocate that beaver and remove the structure that's causing the problem. Now, this isn't, it's not difficult. It's done in Bavaria, where they re-released beavers back about 50 years ago. They have a team of beaver rangers that go around, and if you've got a problem, they'll come and see you and they'll help you sort it out. So, you know, the models are already there to mitigate some of those things. But I think people do have valid, you know, reasons for concern. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring beavers to East Anglia in a controlled fashion was so that there was an opportunity to voice those concerns in a controlled environment that wasn't immediately threatening anybody else. So you could have a slightly more reasoned discussion around it.
I like the idea of being a beaver ranger. Maybe I'll do that when I retire. Sounds rather good job, actually. Sounds quite excellent. Now, Johnny actually has another question about modelling, which we'll come back to, but let's take Charles Croydon's questions first. So he's asking, mycorrhizal fungiform mutualistic relationships with plant roots, and is this in your plans, or is it going to change your plans? Or this is going back to your degree, so hopefully you can remember what to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no fungal expert or anything, but the general principles we're working for is that the more diverse the system you have, both above ground and below ground, and the fewer, particularly fungicides, but other pesticides that you use, the more active those mycorrhizal associations are likely to be, and also the biology, the microbiology in the soil is going to become more, it's going to become healthier.
Yeah.
Therefore, it is going to be more robust, and the crops and the plants and anything else that relies on it will then be more resilient to both climate change and extreme events. So to reform a lot of those mycorrhizal associations, particularly between tree species and amongst tree species and between the trees, the grasses and the rest of what we grow, is definitely something we hope to be able to see a change in, but it will probably happen whether we, well, it will certainly happen whether we measure it or not.
Okay, so Johnny's asking what software or what sort of toolkit, I think he's really asking, are you using for the modelling of your natural capital impact forecast? Is this a DEFRA thing, or is it one?
No. So there is no kind of publicly available model for this, and the industry that's grown up around offering different forms of natural capital valuation, appraisal, partial valuations and appraisals, means that there's a degree of variability. The one we used, which was developed or was available, and then we're helping to kind of improve it, is called the Natural Capital Studio, which is an in-house model that Atkins have used. But I'm working with a number of other people who have got different models. They all try and do roughly the same thing in terms of, but their focus is different. So some are very focused on providing a kind of monetary valuation on services, whereas the one we used focused as much about producing a volumetric calculation, a modelled volumetric calculation for each of the services, or an indicator that we could then use. And it did have a monetary valuation over the top of it, but it was very much a two-stage thing. So we can tweak the monetary valuation based on, you know, either markets that develop or research or information or policy pronouncements or whatever, so that, you know, we know that 1 ton of something can either cost 10 or it can cost 100, you know, pounds. Yeah. It doesn't really matter, but we still know that we're roughly going to be producing 1 ton of it. But it is worth saying that a lot of this is still modelled. So, for example, the nutrient export, we used a DEFRA-based model called FarmScoper to look at the nutrient exports, but that again, you know, that might be superseded, and if we rerun the valuation in 10 years' time, it might show something completely different for our baseline scenario. But at least we've started the process. Yeah, well, that would be true of any business. I mean, it's going to evolve, especially a natural-based business. And that, anyway, we're interested in that in the IGP, and we'd like to do more work on it. Jackie's already beavering away on it, no pun intended. So, Alex Brown is asking, is there an opportunity in what's replacing the Common Agricultural Policy, so ELMS, perhaps in repurposing the idea of set aside as a starting point? And how can we at the IGP or anyone help to advance this agenda? What can we do to help you? So, I mean, set aside was an interesting one because it was essentially a fallowing approach, and there's quite a lot of growing evidence, particularly from the US and Australia, that suggests that actually fallowing is not the best use of ground, particularly if you want to start sort of boosting your below ground carbon sequestration rates. You need living organisms to do that, because the carbon is not going to sequester itself. You need something to photosynthesize it into the ground, essentially. So I think there is definitely an opportunity more broadly from moving away from the Common Agricultural Policy as it as it was, probably not as it, the opportunity is less now that it itself has changed, and the farm to fork agenda in the EU is sort of pushing in roughly the same direction. But the whole environmental land management agenda has the opportunity to really support some of the activities that will deliver public goods. It also has the opportunity to be quite innovative in things like limiting the public goods that public money will procure, but leaving space for private procurement alongside it. So stacking and bundling of benefits off single land areas is going to reduce the onus on the public purse to support everything and maximize the incentive, the financial incentive for landowners to do more than one thing with their land. So, you know, I think there is that an opportunity. I'm not sure that set aside is necessarily the starting point for that by any means. I think there's an awful lot more nuance that we can throw into it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of downstream benefits as well. So that's where your landscape approach becomes very important, because it's not you consuming all that clean water, is it? So somebody else could be paying for that in a different
Absolutely,
way.
yeah.
Not necessarily the public purse. But now Matt has a question, and he's also on the panel, so he can pop back into view. Matt, where are you?
Hi, Charlie. Archie, that was absolutely fantastic. Really
inspirational. You're talking like a Dalek, Matt. You're talking like a Dalek. Can you just check your microphone?
Sorry.
Try again.
Can you hear me? How about now?
You're very quiet now, so you just try again, just for a second.
I think I might have a bit of an internet issue, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right, carry on as a Dalek. We'll try and hear you as Dalek, okay? Carry on.
I was just going to ask, you model wonderful impacts on nature and natural capital, and also the impacts on the business and its sustainability and resilience. To make wider arguments also about the impact on wider livelihoods and wider social impact beyond the business itself.
Okay.
I'm afraid, Henrietta, I don't think I got that.
So I think what Matt is asking, you put it up on this thing and text, Matt. I think what Matt is asking, Archie, is a question about the impact of providing all these ecosystem services on the long-term sustainability of the business and how easy it is to understand that, yeah? That was one part.
I mean, the reason I want to make these kind of structural changes and systemic changes to our business is because I believe that it will be far more sustainable long-term if we make sure that we reduce the risk of degradation of our environmental resources, but also then bring in a much wider social and intellectual collection of minds and people. Because at the moment, what we do is we rely very much on our own intellectual capital to come up with ideas and do things. You know, in like any other business, you know, we need more ideas, we need more people, we need people that have different skills, different approaches, different outlooks. So I think from a sort of truly sustainable perspective, we need to open up. That's quite difficult for a private business, because actually at the end of the day, most of the opportunity lies with me and most of the liability lies with me. So, you know, we will then have to work out how we balance those two. But I think it comes back again to the fact that if we can measure and articulate some of these much wider changes and benefits, then we can present a case that we are much more sustainable than the person next door who might be more extractive in their approach. And this will become much more highly valued, and it will probably be much less tightly regulated than if we just continue to extract and continue to exploit. Then, you know, we can expect to be to struggle to meet the regulation that is aiming to drive standards up. Yeah, now we've got 8 minutes. This is going to be a bit like the Grand National. So Matt's last part of his question was about whether there's a socioeconomic impact case for impacts on the community and other businesses. So in other words, does what you're doing help other people's livelihoods to get better? At the moment, probably the only benefit they get is a marginal reduction in flood risk, which will hopefully maximise over time. When we roll out the bigger model, then I'm hoping that the hyperlocal food chain will actually start supporting both startups and existing businesses who are within that sector, and we're already seeing an increase in footfall and visitors to the area, which is supporting the kind of hospitality type sector businesses, so things. But I mean, obviously, we this year or last year has been so exceptional that we don't really know what the impact of that would have been under a normal circumstance.
But it's the kind of thing we're thinking about and we're trying to model as well. So following on, Tim Fyson is asking you, what truffle species will you have used, and how do you start them off? So are you going to grow truffles?
Yeah, well, we are experimenting. We have a micro nursery at the moment, and we have done a bit of homemade inoculation for both the winter and the autumn truffle. But yeah, it'll take the best part of a decade to work out whether that's worked or not. But in the meantime, we've got self-collected oak plants that are going to be part of our forestry program anyway. So we won't lose out completely.
Okay, that's good. And William Butcher's asking, did specialists help you with the setup of the silvopastures, wetlands and agroforestry areas? For an estate owner to also follow this model but have little experience in putting this approach of putting ecosystem services first, how do you recommend they go about it? So did you have a lot of expert outside help?
No, we're hoping to get it. We've secured a bit of it, but we've put together a very large grant funding application, and hopefully part of that we will get access to a wider group of specialists. But there is quite a lot of resource out there at the moment. So there's a UK focused agroforestry manual, which is freely available, which we've used. There's a number of people that are doing agroforestry at a smaller scale in the UK. There's an agroforestry trust. There's groupings of people around agroforestry. So there's quite a lot of there's a growing interest and a growing sort of expertise. I think the one gap in that expertise is scale. Is if you're doing it at more than a few acres, we don't really have the experience of that in the UK. So that's where we'll be looking more widely for that. And I think if your questioner is interested in doing it for themselves, you're just going to have to seek it out in the same way that I did, which is go and just follow people on Twitter and dig around and jump on webinars and ask lots of questions, and when time permits, get out there and see if you can visit some of these places, because I'm afraid that's the only route that's open to you at the moment.
Right, we might be able to help there in the future. We have been thinking about a knowledge sharing platform for all of you guys. So anyway, that's another story. Now I think Jackie wants to come back. Jackie, did you want to come back? Are you on climate change or are you on something else?
Yes, just hang on a second. Yes, Archie. So Archie and I serve on this climate action group, the Commission for Essex, and Essex is right up there when it comes to impacts. So I'm wondering whether, as we go forward, would you be able to claim for Spain's Hall that you're going to be sort of zero emissions, biodiversity positive by 2030? I mean, is that something that could be used to promote the kind of thinking that you've got? And yeah, so just your reaction, given that we're going to make a big area in Essex, are you going to be part of it because you're in the Blackwater drainage system catchment?
Yeah, I mean, short answer, Jackie, is absolutely. And we're working with Essex County Council on the sort of 1,000 acre, 400 hectare land use change model. They're very keen to support it, and we put in a joint bid to try and do that and try and actually fund the transition. In terms of the claims that we could make, I don't think it would be difficult for us at all to become carbon positive, so net sequesters of carbon. We're not there at the moment by any means, but I think just because of the balance of our business and the amount of land we have available and the amount of tree planting and conversion to grassland that we're planning to do, then I think that we probably could make those claims. I would certainly hope that we would get to biodiversity positive too, but the baseline we have to judge that on is probably not great. So we may struggle to prove those claims. But yeah, I mean, certainly, that's the direction we're trying to go at, and we're trying to offer a site that will become an exemplar that can then test some of these ideas, and the evolution will mean that we look very different in a few years' time with Anglia.
Yeah, and DEFRA's working very hard on the metrics for biodiversity. It's just sort of not ready yet. It's in the cooker, so to speak. So as you probably know, it's kind of... The 2.0 metric is in beta form and out there. There's a 3.0 coming, but
I do have my concerns with that. I'm not quite sure how it integrates with other ecosystem services, because it is designed to be a single service appraisal mechanism for a policy-led purpose, not part of a holistic sustainability framework. And this is something Jackie and I, have discussed at length during the Climate Action Commission, and have proposed a more integrated framework into which biodiversity recording and reporting can fit, but it needs to fit within everything else, or be the underpinning theme for everything else. But you can't just do it on its own.
No.
So
It's not easy. So just finally then, Archie, before we let you go, so what's happening around ammonia and fertilizers and all these kinds of levels of toxicity and so on?
So at the moment, most of our farmers do use inorganic fertilizers, some more than others, because some have on-site livestock, so therefore there is a sort of natural fertilization, or they use straw-based. One of them uses a straw-based pig system, so there's a solid fertilizer there that they use, and interestingly, that farmer I don't think has used inorganic fertilizer for about 25 years.
Wow.
But in terms of the air quality impacts and the climate change impacts of those volatile gases, I think certainly under my land use proposals, what I'm hoping to do is that we get as close to zero inputs, both on a fertilizer basis and a pesticide basis, as we feasibly can, as quickly as we can. So I would hope that certainly we would provide another example of how it could be done. But again, it's very system based. It depends on what you're actually doing with your farming system as to how viable and how quickly you can make that change.
Well, we've run out of time, as we always do on Soundbites. In fact, it's always very annoying that we never have enough time for Soundbites. But anyway, I'm sure we would go on even if we had another hour anyway. But I just wanted to say that it's fantastic that the work you're doing. I mean, really inspirational. And so anytime you'd like to talk to us, we'd love to talk to you. So, and thank you so much for coming and sharing all your ideas and your knowledge and all that stuff about the beavers. I mean, it's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the space and being interested. And I would say, if any of your researchers or any of your departments or anyone think they have something that they want to do that could be usefully done with us, just ask, because, the door is always open.
We may very well take you up on that. And also we in the IGP, because we have the panel here, so panel get ready, we are able to do something that we haven't been able to do for a year or so. We can give you a round of applause, so we'll do that.
Thank you very much
indeed.
Very
much. Hope to see you soon. Thank you very much, Archie. Bye. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Thanks, Archie.
Bye.